As I stated before in my prior video, there are four main forces which drive evolution. They are natural selection, mutation, genetic drift, and gene flow. Now, I'll go into all four of those at length. So to begin with, we have mutation. Mutations are random changes in an organism's DNA. Now, mutations can occur in several places. For example, it can occur in a somatic cell, which is a cell of your body. For example, you can have one of the skin cells on your arm undergo a mutation. That'll be influenced by you, and it won't have any effect whatsoever on your offspring. However, it can also occur in some of your gametic cells, such as your egg or your sperm. If you have a mutation in a gamete, and that egg or that sperm goes on to produce a child, that mutation will go on and be present in all of your children's body cells. Mutations can typically have one of three effects. Some of them are bad. They decrease the overall fitness or survivability of the organism and are not selected for. Now, the second type, the vast majority of them are neutral, meaning that they provide no change whatsoever to the organism's fitness and it is neither helped nor harmed by the mutation. The third type, which is the rarest, are beneficial mutations. These help the organism by increasing its fitness and the likelihood that it'll reproduce and pass on that mutation. Now, specifically, there are several types of mutations in the sense of inversions, deletions, additions, insertions, and things like that. However, I'm going to be discussing that in my next video, which will essentially also give you guys a brief introduction of DNA. But until you guys understand what DNA is and how it works, me going into the nitty-gritty specifics of mutations really won't help you. So I'll leave it as is at this point. Nevertheless, mutations are random. A very important thing that people don't seem to understand is that an organism does not know it has to mutate. For example, let's say that there are a group of green beetles and there are some mutated brown beetles. The green beetles are the natural wild type, but due to a change in the pigment gene, it'll also produce brown. Now, let's say that there's a bird that can only see and is only used to eating the green beetles. It won't touch the brown beetles. Now, did the green beetle, did it know that it had to mutate and become brown so that the bird won't eat it? No, what happened is that it passively mutated and the environment selected for those which were brown and made those which were brown more likely to pass on their brown genes. The second force driving evolution is natural selection. Natural selection is, by definition, a non-random process. Another common mistake is that people seem to think that the organism does the selecting or it's selected for one way or another, but it is actually the environment which is doing the selecting. As I said before, mutations provide the raw material, the raw genetic material for natural selection to work on. You can kind of think of it as mutations creating a static image and natural selection being the refinement of that image to produce a picture. Actually, take a look at this image that I'm showing right now. It's a computer model made by CDK007. I highly suggest you guys check out his vids, which start off by with a random static field, and by selecting only the ones which are likely to improve and closely match the picture that's desired, we end up with an overall South Park picture, or a picture of a South Park character as the net result. Although I absolutely loathe using the term survival of the fittest, this is essentially what it's referring to. In a nutshell, an organism which has genes which allow it to be very well adapted to its environment is more likely to be able to survive and pass on those genes. Over time, those genes will represent a relatively larger percentage of the gene pool of that population. The third force driving evolution is genetic drift, which is a random process. In all actuality, it probably is understated in the sense of genetic drift probably has a bigger effect on population genetics than most people realize, but nevertheless, it is a random process, and it's often overlooked, but it's very important. Now, evolution works best in very, very small populations, because in those populations, there's a lot less averaging, and big changes can accrue very, very quickly. Kind of think about it with a law of averages, and if you've ever done any statistical work, think of outliers. For example, let me say that I'm taking the average weight of a baby, and I have 5 babies. 4 of them weigh 15 pounds, and 1 of them weighs 3 pounds. Now, this is completely hypothetical, but think about the effect of that 3-pound baby on the average weight of all those 5 babies. Now, on the other hand, let's say that I take the birth weight of 100 babies, and 99 of them weigh the 15 pounds, and there's still that 1 3-pounder. So if you have the large sample size of 100, the average birth weight will be much closer to the reality of 15 than it will in that 5, or in the group of 5 individuals. Now, the 3-pound baby is termed an outlier because it greatly skews the statistical results that you're looking for. It's just a random, aberrant data point. which can basically screw up on trends. Now, for evolution's sake, evolution works best, as I said before, in small groups. Now, this is because those random genes can be compared to outliers. Any new mutations that would be great to be selected for are often drowned out if you have an extremely large population. Whereas in a small population, those random genes will contribute much more, and they'll be much more powerful and pronounced. Now, this is where genetic drift comes into play. Genetic drift is a random change in gene frequency over time, which is due purely to chance. Now, contrast this with natural selection, which is actually not due to chance, which is, the environment is selecting more fit ones. In this one, this actually is an accident. If you have a population of 5 beetles and half of them are brown, half of them are green, and you just step on some, and you just by chance knock out all the brown ones, well, then you're going to have a population with only green, and the brown's going to be eliminated from the population. This is gene flow, and what this can do is when a population or a large population splits into two small ones, it can create large differences between those two populations over time, and that is exactly how those two populations will split, and evolution and speciation stems from that. So a large population with tons of mixing of different genes from different individuals makes it hard for any differences to accrue. Large populations tend to be relatively homogeneous, and although there are a decent number of differences among individuals, everything gets sort of blended together. And this works against speciation because speciation relies on differences within individuals and differences within populations. In other words, if you have a big population that's subset into two smaller ones, that's exactly how speciation occurs, because genes are not mixing. So mixing of genes tends to slow down evolution, and that's actually what the fourth concept is, and that's gene flow. So with regard to gene flow, let's go back to the drawing board and let's take a big population and actually examine how speciation happens. Note that I'll be covering this very much more in depth in later videos, so if you don't understand it now, I'll cover speciation much more. I'm not planning on doing much of it here. However, speciation typically happens, there are several types, but it's when you have a large population and then a small population buds off, or there's some sort of barrier between the population. It can either get segmented in half or whatnot, or anything like that, basically to prevent the genes from being exchanged from the two. Now, gene flow is exactly that. It's genes being exchanged between the two populations. So you can think about it as a smaller subpopulation is trying to accrue a lot of genetic differences from the main population. However, because there's still mating going on, it prevents and it slows down those differences from accruing, because the genes keep on getting mixed together and the main population genes keep on getting inserted into the small founder genes. An easy way to remember the differences between genetic drift and gene flow is you can just think of genetic drift as the genes in the population just kind of randomly drifting away and being removed from the population. Whereas with gene flow, you can think about genes flowing between the two populations, because that's exactly what it does. I'll end this video here. My next video will be a basic introduction into DNA, and it'll also be explaining the different types of mutations. Oh, lastly, a couple of you guys have asked me about a lot of the images and the demotivational posters and whatnot that I use in my videos, so I've decided to create a Photobucket album and upload them to there. It's photobucket.com, username is Don Exodus, but I'll go ahead and include the link to the album in the video description. So I created the vast majority of them. Feel free to use and distribute them however you guys feel fit. Enjoy, guys, and thanks again for your time.